Hey you. Yeah, I'm talking to you. Duncan is the GOAT 97. I'm going to say some negative things about the San Antonio Spurs, but it's okay. If you want to leave a dislike rating, that's fine. If you want to leave a negative comment, that's fine. But I'm just going to be realistic and talk about where I think the Spurs are at right now, okay? It's going to be fine. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and in today's video, we're talking about the San Antonio Spurs, a team that missed the playoffs for the first time this year in a very, very long time. And they're in a relatively difficult situation moving forward. It's hard to find a path that puts them back towards being one of the best teams in the Western Conference in an immediate sense. And in the long term, there are some pieces to build around here, but how they're all going to fit together is definitely a question mark at this point. But that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. But really quickly before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, then consider subscribing. I upload basically every single day, and leaving a like rating is a great way to let me know not only that you're enjoying the content, but also that you want to help out the video a ton as well. With that said, let's go and get started. Okay, so for the first time in a long time, people are legitimately down on the San Antonio Spurs, not just as a team, but as an organization. And I am certainly one of those people, and I'm not going to apologize for it. I don't think that they're really moving in the correct direction, and I also don't really think it makes sense to give them the benefit of the doubt anymore either. There are rumors swirling around the NBA that this team, even at the organizational level, just isn't the same as they used to be. There have been a lot of smart people that have been taken away from the Spurs organization and gone elsewhere, and as a result, there are a lot of people that think that they're just not as good at what they're doing as they used to be. Now, obviously, the front office is still mostly intact, and Gregg Popovich is still there, so they're going to continue to be a good team, but when or how they're going to be able to get back up to a championship level is certainly a question mark right now. Now, I will give them credit because they have been a great team for such a long time. They have been really a foundational part of the NBA for the last 20 or so years, and I give them credit for that. And it would have been difficult for them to anticipate the Kawhi Leonard situation. Many people, myself included, were extremely surprised at the time that Kawhi wanted to leave, but that doesn't excuse the limited assets that they got in return in exchange for Kawhi Leonard. And at this point, it's basically just Jakob Poeltl, who's a free agent this offseason, and DeMar DeRozan, who's a free agent next offseason, and neither of those players have helped reach the heights that Kawhi Leonard helped that team get to. And again, I understand that it was a difficult situation. The circumstances weren't great in terms of Kawhi's trade value, but you certainly could have gotten a lot more as it relates to future assets rather than an immediate piece in DeRozan and a middling future asset in Poeltl. And I bring this up to show how the Kawhi trade sets this team up for the next era of Spurs basketball, and the short answer is it doesn't. They go into this offseason already over the salary cap and with three relatively important free agents, Marco Bellinelli, Bryn Forbes, and most notably, Jakob Poeltl, as I mentioned earlier. And the reason that they don't really have a ton of cap space is because even though they do have some salaries coming off the books, DeJounte Murray's new extension kicks in next year and he goes up to making $14 million a season. So their avenues for improvement are certainly limited. They don't have cap space, they don't really have trade assets, and their young players are really only going to become solid players. And that's really the issue here in San Antonio is outside of DeRozan and Aldridge, if you want to call those guys stars still, there aren't really any stars on this roster or players that look to become stars. That doesn't mean that there aren't players that I like on this roster. I really like Lonnie Walker, and Derrick White and DeJounte Murray are going to be good players down the road, but none of them are going to be all-stars at any point in their careers. At least it doesn't look like they're on pace to be those types of players right now, which means that they either don't have great trade value and or they don't really help this team a lot moving forward either. So again, it's a tough situation to be in right now in San Antonio. Now, given they're the Spurs, they're still going to find a way to be a good team next year. They're probably going to be contending for the postseason next year, depending on what they do with their roster. But outside of that, and outside of this 1 to 2 year window that DeRozan and Aldridge are still going to be on the roster, there really doesn't look to be a lot of promising things happening in San Antonio. Now, granted, the fact that they don't really have a young up-and-coming star on the roster is not all that surprising, given that they haven't picked in the lottery in forever. And this year, they finally do get one of those picks. They're picking 11th in the draft. And given the fact that it's the Spurs, they still know how to draft and develop talent. That player is probably going to end up becoming a good to maybe even great player. We've seen guys selected in that 10 to 14 range in recent years become really, really good players, and I wouldn't be surprised if San Antonio, even in a draft class that doesn't look to have a ton of talent at the top, but has a good amount of depth right around when they're going to be selecting, I wouldn't be surprised to see them pick a guy that ends up becoming, some kind of really, really good starter level player with the opportunity to potentially become an all-star. And if that did happen, that would obviously be huge for this team. But still, even if that was the case, even if they selected a borderline all-star caliber player this year at some point in their careers, I don't know if the complementary options already on this roster are good enough to really push them towards anything meaningful once Aldridge and DeRozan leave. So again, really, they need a star, and their opportunities to get one are really not that plentiful if they're even there at all. And so what I would expect this team to do next year is they are going to pick whoever they want to pick with the 11th overall pick, prioritize the development of him and those other younger players, try and bring back Pirtle if they can, not go too far, over the salary cap, because you don't want to be hindering yourself for future moves and things like that, and then run it back with the same group. You've got Aldridge, you've got DeRozan, you've got whoever you pick with the 11th pick, you've got some internal development, ideally from some of these younger perimeter players, and with that group, they should be able to contend for a postseason spot next year, especially if Gregg Popovich is still the head coach. And as of right now, I would anticipate that Gregg Popovich is going to return for next season. However, beyond next season, I think that is when we're going to start to potentially see some big changes in San Antonio, maybe even at the head coaching position, because that's going to be the first season in which Aldridge and DeRozan are both going to be free agents, and they're going to have the opportunity to do a lot of different things with this roster. And the smart thing to do would be to start some kind of rebuild, again, assuming whoever they get with the 11 overall pick doesn't become this like instant star, right? Because in that offseason, they're really not going to have very many people under contract, and the guys that they are going to have under contract are those younger players that I mentioned. The only one of them that will need a new deal is Derrick White. So you can go into the 2021 offseason with a ton of salary cap space, DeJounte Murray, Lonnie Walker, other guys under contract. You can re-sign Derrick White to a fair deal and have a bit of a blank slate along with the 11th overall pick, whoever you pick there, and move forward with that core of players. And if moving forward for you means that you want to re-sign a whole bunch of complimentary options in free agency and use your cap space on a whole bunch of $10 to $15 million guys, then do that. If you want to try and make a run at some stars, if Popovich thinks he has a couple years left of coaching, then do that. And if not, maybe you can accumulate some assets by taking on salaries for other teams. That is really the offseason in which the Spurs can go in any direction that they want to. But if I was going to predict what was going to happen right now, I'd say they're going to run it back next year with a similar group. And then when we get to the offseason of 2021, they're probably going to be looking at least a slightly aggressive rebuild around that core group of young players that are currently on the roster and under contract up to that point. And what that probably means is that Gregg Popovich will no longer be the head coach of the Spurs. And it's probably just going to be as a result of a retirement, or if he goes to a different team, because he's never been interested in rebuilding this roster. And I think that the front office hopefully is going to come to the realization in that offseason that that is the best move for the organization and for the franchise. And if they're able to do that, I have every bit of confidence in this front office to be able to do good things over the next couple of seasons. And a few years from now, depending on how their players develop, potentially be a really, really good team again. But I think that they need to finally make that decision to go ahead and rebuild. They can run it back one more time if they want to, if Popovich wants to coach one more season. But after that, I think the smart move is certainly to rebuild. Now, the only other scenario that I could foresee here is if Popovich wants to keep coaching and they want to bring back LaMarcus Aldridge and DeMar DeRozan in that offseason, assuming they're still on the roster, they could keep doing the same thing over and over again. And I wouldn't be surprised if they did that, because they've continued to double down on this group year after year, despite it being pretty clear that they're not going to be a top team in the Western Conference. But I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. And at the end of the day, it's the NBA, right? You never know. They could pick the star among stars with the 11th pick and be an incredible team a couple of years from now. Or, things could completely hit the fan. They could trade Popovich for picks. Like, there could be so many different things happening with this group because of how crazy the NBA can be sometimes. But all I can do is look at what is in front of me for this team. And right now, it doesn't look great, and I think the reset button needs to be hit in 2021, but I wouldn't anticipate that happening for this upcoming season. But as always, I'm interested to see what you guys have to say down in the comment section below. Let me know what you think the Spurs should do and or what you think they actually will do moving forward to try and be something resembling a top team in the Western Conference once again over the next handful of seasons. But regardless, I'm really interested to see what direction they end up taking. But yeah, that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.